Hello and welcome to Let's Talk Climate. We're here with a very special episode with all three sector directors of ecoAmerica's programs. Before we jump into our discussion, here are some brief housekeeping items. This session is being recorded and will be available for on-demand viewing on ecoAmerica's YouTube channel. Please engage with us online using the hashtag Let's Talk Climate throughout our discussion and in the days to come. And please use the chat function to ask questions throughout the webcast. You can send your questions to us by choosing all panelists from the drop-down in the chat box. ecoAmerica staff are standing by to answer any tech questions and help facilitate Q&A with all of you, which we'll get to in just a bit. Today on Let's Talk Climate, our topic is Collective Community Action for Climate Solutions. I'm Rebecca Rehr, Director of the Climate for Health program at ecoAmerica, and I'm joined by my colleagues, Fête Cruz, Director of Blessed Tomorrow, and the Honorable Jennifer Roberts, Director of Path to Positive Communities. Over to you, Annie, for some opening remarks.
Hey everybody, and thanks Rebecca. It's so strange that I don't get to see you guys in person these days, so I'm always happy to spend time with you both. And I know we all say, and often, that there is a great power in collaboration. And so while we run engagement programs for the faith sector, the health sector, for local communities, the real power in achieving climate solutions really happens when communities come together and leverage their expertise, their influence, their resources. So whether you're listening today as a person of faith, a health professional, or a public community leader, just remember, we are all community. I mean, there are doctors and public health practitioners attending worship services today. There are elected officials whose faith grounds their call to civil service, like Justice Ginsburg and Congressman John Lewis, and even our esteemed Mayor Roberts here on the call with us today. So, you know, the governor of my state here in Virginia, Ralph Northam, he's a physician. So while there remains, I think, value in sector-specific climate engagement and mobilization efforts, it's critical. We are each other. You know, we are each other. And at the end of the day, the urgency of this climate crisis, it really demands that we kind of lock arms and push forward together. So I'm excited. I'm excited to talk about this today. It's important.
Yeah, thanks, Annie. And same to you. Always a pleasure. And really looking forward to our conversation today. And what so much of what you said rings true and really sets the tone for a great conversation. And we wanted to start with a question from the audience, actually submitted during registration for the webcast. Sharon from Huntington Station, New York asks, what is the best way to engage my town during COVID? And specifically, what are some good socially distanced activities for a church? Jennifer, why don't you start with the first part of that question and Annie take the next part?
Sure, and I just want to echo, it's great to be with you both today, and it's wonderful working side by side. I guess we're literally side by side in this video on climate solutions in America. So the question about how do you stay engaged during COVID, you know, you're doing it right now. Social media, you know, we are in the virtual world, in the virtual space now. In fact, the community sector even had a training for people in Florida on how to be advocates on social media. So, you know, all of your legislators have social media accounts. A lot of people engage on Twitter and Facebook and then Instagram. So absolutely you can build a movement through social media because there are groups that you can join. You can find other affiliated groups who care about the environment and care about climate change and are doing things, taking action. You know, we've also seen in our communities, because people are looking for time outside. They're, you know, in their houses and their apartments. They want that time outside. So we see biking groups. You know, bikes are 6 feet apart from each other. You can have bike events where you talk about tree cover and tree ordinances and bike lanes for your community. Those are great things to do. There also is still public comment in all the meetings, whether it's your city council, your county commission, your state legislature. All these organizations have time for public comment. They are still taking those, and you just, you know, you join that Zoom call. It's a little different than being at the podium and in person looking at your legislators, but those are still part of so many of our legislative bodies. And there are also advisory committees that are still meeting on Zoom. And even if you don't have Zoom on your computer, you can use your phone. So they are continuing to engage the community, and we know that public engagement around climate solutions is incredibly important. So we tell folks that even during this time of COVID, it is absolutely time to continue to engage your community on climate solutions, to help spread the word about the good things that are happening. You know, cities are continuing with their climate action plans. And, you know, there's so many ties between those health impacts that Rebecca is going to talk about and what's going on with COVID and the awareness that that is building.
I mean, to the question about what can a church do, or members of any faith worship community, I just echo everything that Jennifer shared, because like I said, I mean, we are individuals within communities, citizens within communities, and we can bring our unique faith perspective to those conversations that Jennifer was just talking about, whether it's, you know, sharing comments at a city council meeting, writing letters to the editor or op-eds. But if you're looking for specific things that have to do with your faith tradition, you know, I just want to encourage you to think about using this as an opportunity to continue to educate people, to continue to invite others into advocacy activities with you. And so, you know, there are lots of great work that's going on. My colleague will chat out here an example of a creation-focused worship service that the Lutherans Restoring Creation just did. I think they had, you know, several thousand people view this across the country. And congregations within the Lutheran Church, or really anyone, any other Christian tradition, can use the content from that and potentially run their own creation-focused worship service. And there are all kinds of resources. If you come to blessedtomorrow.org, we can direct you to places where you can find these kinds of materials. You know, we also have our ambassador program. If you're not familiar with it, we train individuals around the country to talk to people in their community and within their congregations. And we've been hearing from our ambassadors who are offering, you know, a virtual coffee hour after a Sunday online worship service, or, you know, considering a book study related to faith and climate, or just an environmental book. It doesn't necessarily have to be a faith-specific one. Just to start to continue the opportunities to create conversation, and then inviting people into things. And I'm sure all of us will agree, you can vote. You can vote your faith values, you can vote your faith and climate values, and you can invite others to join you in that as well. So lots to do.
Yeah, and you know, it's the sort of just past and in the midst of the high holidays in the Jewish tradition, and I was, for one, fairly skeptical of the online services, but found them to be very engaging and meaningful, and a time of true community when we need it most. So you know, thanks to all the faith institutions out there and houses of worship bringing people together. And there's, you know, some really fun Jewish holidays around, you know, with themes of Tikkun Olam, healing the world, and Tu B'Shvat. You know, you do a lot around tree planting, and there's some fun activities. And I know I've been a part of them. And but if I can just add something really quick before moving on to the next question, I also think film screenings are a good opportunity to engage virtually. I know some of our partners have worked together to screen, for example, a new film, Unbreathable: The Fight for Healthy Air. It's actually just a 30-minute film, and it's celebrating the 50th anniversary of the Clean Air Act, which we know is such a vital tool, not only for our health, you know, but for curbing climate change. And so that film, you can work with the filmmakers to, you know, host a screening, and they're doing it all virtually now. So they have that experience, and treat it kind of like a book club, where, you know, you can watch it together or have people watch it beforehand and then host virtual discussions, you know, kind of a coffee clatch style or happy hour style. But that I think there's some really interesting opportunities to engage in the climate and health space around some movie showings. And if I might be so bold as to suggest these webcasts, which are all recorded and on ecoAmerica's YouTube channel, they vary in topic and length. And I've heard some really creative uses. A couple of my colleagues and friends who are university professors are incorporating some of the shorter ones into their coursework. And I think could also, you know, help serve as a, you know, starter for a really interesting conversation for you all to out there, you know, listening in, to continue. We really want you to, you know, continue these conversations that may start here.
Don't recreate the wheel. There's so much out there you can pull from.
Yeah, it's great, Rebecca, that you talk about filming because, you know, even before COVID, people were gathering to watch movies about different environmental issues and then having conversations. What we've seen happening, I'm in Charlotte, North Carolina, and we've seen some buildings offering their wall to do outdoor screenings, and people drive up in their cars if there's a parking lot, and they can all watch together in their cars. You know, we have the drive-in movie is back. So that is certainly a way to continue to connect. I'm going to take another question that we had come in, and this is from Angela in Claremont, California. And I know Claremont because our daughter went to school there at the Claremont colleges. And so she commented, our biggest challenge is moving beyond concern and talk to tangible action. And we hear this all the time. Okay, it's great to talk about climate solutions and help people understand. How do you move to action? And I'm gonna have Rebecca be the first to answer this because the health sector is on fire with all that they've been doing. They see the impact so directly in their work. And so, Rebecca, I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about health professionals and your Climate for Health network, how they're talking about climate, but then turning those conversations to action.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Jennifer. I think I actually want to call out two specific examples right now. There are Signon Opportunities that Climate for Health has partnered with a number of other health groups to push out there for folks to sign on. The first is a Dear Patients letter. So from practicing and retired clinicians to write to their patients. And it's a public letter and you can sign on now. And if you're tuning in and you're a clinician, we just put that link right in the chat box. And if you have physicians in your family, you know, you can forward it on to them. And it's an opportunity to engage your patients in understanding how climate change is influencing your health now and why it's so important to consider leaders who prioritize climate solutions because it improves our health. So encourage folks to check that out. You'll see the Climate for Health logo right at the top with so many of our other wonderful partners. And I would also call out the Health Voices for Climate Action campaign, where health professionals have the opportunity to submit 60 to 90 second videos that they're telling their personal stories and then also emphasizing how those personal stories have encouraged them, what they're seeing in their patients, what they're seeing in their communities. And many of them share actually stories of their own kids, why that motivates them to be more active in the climate space. So those are just two things you can do right now. And I would encourage folks, Annie just said it, don't recreate the wheel. If you like the video idea, you know, work with your community. Maybe there's a faith institution out there. Maybe there's a house of worship that wants to do a video campaign.
I'm sure
there is a video campaign. There's a voting video campaign that I think you featured in the last Let's Talk Climate. But these short videos are really how to reach people right now. And just telling those personal stories makes a huge difference. So those are just two really good examples that we've been involved in. And I would also just encourage folks to check out something that's come out of the call to action on climate health and equity, which is also a health sector initiative. There's now a dozen questions every candidate must answer on climate health and equity. And I think you can be a health professional or you can just care about your health to bring those questions into town halls, submit them, you know, as folks take, you know, maybe they're having a tweet storm or a tweet chat, and you all can take those questions and ask, you know, candidates, or even after the election, hold your elected officials accountable for those answers. But I would also just encourage folks to check out that resource as well.
Well, and so, you know, the last Let's Talk Climate episode was featured Blessed Tomorrow and some of our wonderful partners, and we talked about voting and you know, activities that faith institutions and individuals of faith are leaning into. And we know it's clearly one of the best ways that we can actually act on climate change right now. but how do we do it safely? How do we do that safely right now? Jennifer, I'm wondering if you want to take a first pass at this, since I know you're engaged on the ground in North Carolina.
Absolutely. And I've been a candidate many times and worked on get out the vote and getting information out many times. And I do want to just add that when you ask candidates questions about specific issues, they absolutely know that their constituents care. And if they hear it from a number of different places, they're going to make that part of their platform. Absolutely, candidates are responsive to their constituents. And I know a lot of candidates who started studying up on things like, what is a Green New Deal? And things they may not have heard before, just because constituents asked about it. So I would just echo what Annie said. In terms of voting, there are great ways to do it safely. We are very worried about the pandemic, and that's where everyone should be. So many states have expanded their early voting options and their mail-in voting options. In North Carolina, we call it absentee ballots. And what we also know is that people need to check their registration to make sure that they are registered. Many states have a practice, if you haven't voted in 8 years, of taking your name off the voter roll. So check your registration and then find out from your Board of Elections all about how you vote early, how you can do absentee, because those are ways to do it safely with more distance. Mail-in ballots, of course, you don't have to be in person. Early vote, when those are spread out, those days are spread out over many days, then you're going to have fewer people waiting in line at any given time. And so that's also a good way to exercise your democratic right to vote. The website that you can go to that has every state, and what I emphasize is to use official websites. We know that there are hackers out there as well. Government sites like the Secretaries of State have extra protections. They have the ability to hire really good IT professionals who can keep those sites safe for the information. So the one that I like is the nass.org. And that's the National Association of Secretaries of State, because Secretaries of State control the voting process. And nass.org, if you look, Can I Vote? They have, you can check your registration, you can check the absentee and early vote requirements, you can check the day of voting issues, you can find your polling place, all of that, because they have a drop-down menu where you select your state and it takes you right to your state's official site. And so there are a lot of other groups out there that are helping, you know, vote.org and so many others. But I always emphasize, especially now that we're worried about that hacking, I emphasize using an official site. And of course, if you do want to go in person on the day of, because there are some people who just like the excitement, we know that every place is talking about, you know, wearing a mask, standing 6 feet apart, being ready to, you know, to stand for a while, bring a chair if you have to, but we know it's a really important year to vote. And every year is an important year, but in a presidential year, there are so many things on the ballot. One more thing I want to say is that in North Carolina and in many other states, we elect judges as well. So make sure that you go all the way down the ballot from, you know, the president down to your local officials, because in the world of climate solutions and environment and environmental protection, many times the courts have helped hold polluters accountable and have helped keep people following the laws with the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act that we know have protected us and helped our climate. So remember that all of those positions are really important to your future and to your climate solutions.
And if I could just add to that HealthyVotingorg is a good resource for some of what Jennifer was just talking about for the safety precautions you can take if you are going to vote in person. But definitely all of the above that Jennifer said about checking your registration. I'll just say it again because it's really important. Check your registration and vote by mail. So I live in Washington, D.C. They send us, I actually meant to bring it and I have it in the other room. I got my ballot the other day. And, you know, we made the decision to take it to one of the designated ballot boxes around the city to drop it off ourselves, not put it in the mail and those, you know, so you do have options like that. And there's a new public health communications collaborative that's put together by a couple of our partners, and they have some of the most up-to-date sort of questions that are coming in real time from the public health sector on COVID. And they held a webinar yesterday that answered several questions about voting. So I would just, that website is going to be updated on a regular basis. And I would just check that out as you're making your plan to vote, because you should have a plan with, and then encourage others to do the same.
I want to go back to something that Jennifer said just a moment ago, which is that elected leaders need to hear from their constituents. And I'm curious, in your experience, Jennifer, as mayor, and in the work that you do through the Path to Positive Communities program, why do elected leaders need to hear particularly from the health and faith sector and from health and faith leaders?
Well, Annie, that's a great question. And I know that that both Bless It Tomorrow and Climate for Health are all about helping empower people in the faith sector and the health sector to be those advocates that speak to elected officials. And I can say, as a former elected official sitting behind the dais listening to constituents, that there are trusted messengers that your elected leaders also believe. And part of the reason is that we know there's not an ulterior motive. It's not a political motive. If a pastor or a rabbi or an imam stands up and says, we have a moral imperative to care for God's creation, to care for the earth, and we're harming our climate, we're harming our earth, and it harms us as well. And when a doctor stands up, especially if they're wearing their scrubs, if a doctor stands up and says, I'm seeing an uptick in asthma cases, and I know it's related to air pollution from the coal plant that's in one of our challenged neighborhoods. When elected officials hear that straight from a doctor, from a faith leader, they absolutely see them as a trusted messenger and take that message to heart. They know that they're usually often also voters, but it's more about the professional perspective, that they speak from a voice of authenticity. They speak from a voice of knowledge. And the health statistics are very telling, and the numbers are very compelling. And when you get a doctor telling a story about a young child who has asthma, who's missed so many days of school, and they live next to the highway with all the polluting cars, or other things that are causing our climate to really be challenged. In North Carolina, we had a whole school district that a lot of schools were flooded. We had a couple of hurricanes hit the eastern part of our state, and it took days for the flood to recede. And so those schools were damaged with mold, et cetera. Kids had to actually go to other surrounding counties to go to school. And when you hear these stories told by somebody who you trust, doesn't have an ulterior motive, it absolutely moves elected leaders to action.
And I would just add, I think some people are uncomfortable or not sure how they can do that, how they can have those conversations with their elected officials. Obviously, we're not doing it in person right now, but there are opportunities to contact and talk to your elected officials in a virtual setting or in writing right now. But practice talking to people that you are comfortable with. Find people who, are willing to hear your story, or people who you want to share this story with. Get some courage and then go and talk to your elected officials. So,
Annie, I have another perspective on that. So a lot of times elected officials have an idea for an initiative, but they need the public to show up, right? Because sometimes, I always told my colleagues, there were 11 people on our city council, and so you have to get 6 votes. And what's more compelling than having one of your colleagues say, oh, clean air is really important and climate solutions are important, is to have people in the community show up who are those constituents. And so what I always wondered is, how do I find doctors and faith leaders who care about climate? How do I, as elected official, knowing that I need my colleagues to hear from their constituents, and I know they're going to trust these folks, what are some ways that I can reach out, that elected officials can reach out? Because I work with a lot of, in Path to Positive, a lot of city and county elected leaders. And so tell us a little bit about, if I'm, here saying, how can I find doctors who care and are willing to speak? Tell me how I do that.
You want to start, Rebecca? You want me to?
You go ahead, because I have a story to accompany my answer.
Sure. Well, so if you tuned in last week, again, we had our wonderful friends, Brian McLaren, who's a well-known Christian author and activist, and Jackie DuPont Walker, who runs the AME Social Action Commission, which runs their voting program, talking about how we engage people of faith and our communities broadly on voting, particularly with climate solutions. And Brian told this little anecdote that people of faith, they don't care if you are like them, but they care that you like them. And what he was really trying to get at last week was that it's not just that, it's not about necessarily needing to pretend you're more religious than you are, or that you are of the faith that you're going to, interact with. But just do your homework ahead of time and reach out, extend the invitation, open the door of communication. These people, they're a part of your community. They shepherd, tens, sometimes hundreds, sometimes thousands of members of your community, especially if we're talking about clergy. And they want to hear from you. If they say no, they say no, but open that door, extend the invitation, reach out. And I will tell you, we know with the Blessed Tomorrow program that there are many communities of faith out there who care about this, who are prioritizing it, and who want to get involved. And elected officials may not know how to reach out to them, and they may not know how to reach out to elected officials. They all want to do it. So let's just get over it. Now is the time. We have a sense of urgency. Make the call. Extend the hand. Well, maybe don't extend the hand right now, but Rebecca, tell your story.
Yeah, so I just wanted to build on what you both were saying and sort of talk about timing as well, because it's critically important. Every state has a different legislative session and different structure to your legislative session. And there's even one state, at least one that I know of, that has a unicameral legislature. So it doesn't even have two chambers of their legislature. It's Nebraska, in case anybody wanted that piece of trivia. But know your state's legislative session, and it is critically important to show up for bill hearings in person or online, submit testimony, show support for specific initiatives. But it is so important to be in touch with your elected officials outside of the session. Build that relationship so it's not just transactional. And Jennifer, you would know this better than either of us, but that it's during a session, you're considering hundreds, if not thousands, of different pieces of legislation at once, and perhaps you care about climate change, but you have to weigh in on a number of different bills, and you can't designate the time right now, especially if you're not on the right committee, to this issue. So outside of session is really a time to educate, to build relationships with your elected officials. And so I just encourage folks to think about timing, and think about what your ask is. Our communications guidance from ecoAmerica is always, end with your ask. So what is your ask? And is that ask being made at a time that makes sense for that ask? And the story to accompany that is, I've made this admission several times now on this webcast, so it may not be an admission anymore, but I am a recovering lobbyist. It's yeah, we have a little club, and we one time post session in Maryland, I was walking around the halls in Annapolis, handing out a survey, wanting to know how folks used our information during the session. Was it useful to you? Had you even heard of us? We were small, and while I was walking the halls, there were a handful of legislators there, and I ran into one who said, "Thanks for the survey. I'm actually working on a different one." The League of Conservation Voters puts out, scorecards and things like that, and she was working on one of those, and is not a person I had run into before, because not on the committee that I usually testified in front of. And she just said, so your environment stuff, what can you tell me about climate change? This is a dream question. And it was, at first you're kind of like, where should I start? And then I really let her know about how that I'm coming at it from a health perspective. I think about it in terms of health, and specifically for Maryland, you know, there are islands in the Chesapeake Bay that are seeing the water levels rise and are really at risk of no longer existing, including some of the, you know, sort of the pride of the state, you know, there. And that I'm really worried about vector-borne illnesses, that it is getting warmer, and the mosquitoes that carry diseases are being able to live farther north than typically they would have. And so I'm worried about that. And the slow and thoughtful like change in her expression as she listened to me is something that, I mean, this was years ago now, and it sticks with me because, and she just said, you know, no one has ever explained it to me like that before. And it was, I think, because it was outside of the session and I wasn't in there asking for support on a bill. I was just there. I was actually there for something else, but, you know, being able to talk about climate and health without the pressure of a bill, without the timing pressure that she would have been facing on a number of different issues, was a really meaningful conversation. And just to answer really quickly the actual question, is check out, I would say to elected officials, get in contact with your state chapters of groups like the American Public Health Association. You know, the state-based chapters are the membership organizations for those groups. I mean, you know, there are regional associations through the National Environmental Health Association. And those folks are going to know your area well, because that's often a question legislators ask, is not only just about the issue, but then how is it affecting this area? And it's those folks who are really engaged in those, you know, local chapters of the professional associations in the health sector that are there, and many of them eager, like Annie said, eager to engage, maybe don't know how, maybe a little intimidated by the elected officials, and that we really, we want to get over that and reach out.
The other thing that's important to remember is, you know, like you said, there's so many issues elected officials are facing every day. Something new comes at you. And if you can give them information specifically about their district. So a lot of times they might have statewide information or national information, but if you know, have a source, or you can take the time to research specifically, you know, how many kids in my district have asthma, and what percentage is that, and how many people, you know, children of color have asthma, and how does that compare to the white population, and how can I, you know, make that a talking point in my platform, because I want to show people I'm familiar with what's happening, I know the causes, and I want to make a difference and do something about it. And so if you can gather that information, you know, congressional folks have staffers. People at the local level do not have staffers. They have a lot of volunteers who are, you know, sometimes able to get them information, sometimes not. And sometimes they don't have a lot of time to prepare and to get that. So think of it as educating. You are educating your elected officials because you are on the ground, you see what's happening, you have a really clear view, and you can help guide them in that understanding that leads to, and it may lead to, you know, other great things they're working on. As you know, there might be other things that you can help them with. So just think about it that way. You're not bothering them, you're helping them.
Yeah, so I haven't seen, you know, if folks have any final questions for us in the chat, let us know. I know that Megan is chatting out some answers to some things that have come in. So check that out. But I think, you know, one note we usually like to end on is a note of hope. So 2020 has been a pretty rough year for all of us in many ways. And I was hoping folks could hear a little from each of us, some encouraging things that we're seeing in our sectors right now.
No, that's great. I always, I agree. You got to end on all the positive things. That's what our Let's Talk Climate education is all about. We always tell people to end with positive things and talk about benefits of climate solutions. So one of the interesting things that we're seeing in the community sector is we are seeing regional collaboration. And we know that, you know, air and water don't stop at the state line or the county line. You know, we see the connection with our natural resources and with climate impacts between and among counties and states. And so we're seeing a lot more regions pulling together. Utah is just putting together a Utah climate action and clean air plan. Southwest Florida is putting together a regional resiliency compact. And, we see that Chicago area has the greenest region with 270 something cities and towns all coming together around common resources, common challenges, and working together on everything from planning to zoning to land use to, tree cover, all the things we know are going to help with climate, both with the impacts and helping clean the air and restore the natural systems that have been damaged. So we see the regional collaboration. In fact, one of our communities said that they started out with a regional group around COVID because they were trying to figure out where the PPE was and how to share it and where the greatest needs were and where to put resources and emergency responders. And because they formed a regional group, this is in the Atlanta area, they then moved on with that regional connection to work on climate issues. Because again, they saw the connection with all their built systems that they needed to have collaboration and coordination on. And so that was a great positive thing to see happen. We also are seeing that local is in again. So local food, people are growing gardens in their yards. Cities are changing their zoning so they let you have a garden in your yard. They are looking at supporting local farms, connecting farms to local grocery stores, and tagging where it comes from so you know where your food comes from. But all of that reduces emissions of the trucking that it takes to send stuff across the country. So local is in, natural and agricultural solutions are in. And the last thing I'll say that's really positive is that our cities have been challenged because we have systems built on racism. We have structures in our redlining in our cities, in the way that we have built, even where our tree cover is, where we put the polluting parts of our cities, that's all connected to climate justice. And because of the focus on racial justice and climate justice, we're actually seeing cities make progress because they recognize it is much larger. It affects health, it affects economic opportunity, it affects kids staying in school. All these things are linked because of climate impacts and racial justice coming together and people being aware. We're seeing solutions that are integrated, that are multi-solving the challenges we know face all of us. And so that gives me hope. It gives me hope to see people uniting, working together with a common purpose, even though the challenge is great.
Oh, absolutely. The faith person in me wants to say amen, Jennifer. I want to share from the faith perspective. I mean, gosh, there's so many great things going on, and I'll talk about a couple of them. But something that I've been encountering more and more with my colleagues in this space and folks who are leading both nationally and internationally is this concept of climate and eco grief and anxiety, and that it's not just, as Rebecca can attest, it's not just the health sector or mental health providers who are hearing about this and experiencing it with people and being called forward to support individuals through this kind of experience, but it's faith leaders. And so, really having important conversations about the role that the faith sector can play in helping to provide that kind of backbone support for all of us in this movement who are trying to really, move forward these ambitious climate solutions and feeling the trudge of it sometimes, topped with, the COVID pandemic, topped with this, important focus on our institutional systems of racism here in this country, on, our issues of democracy, the economic impacts, clergy and faith leaders, across the spectrum are being encountered with their their flocks every day, who are really struggling right now. And so I'm hopeful because I think that that's an important value that the faith sector can add to this work. And there are more and more people talking about it, and opportunities where, ecoAmerica is interested. Rebecca and I are talking about ways that we can bridge the work that she and Climate for Health and her colleagues in the mental health sector have been doing on this issue with folks in the faith sector who are interested in pursuing it further. But there are lots of other examples. I mean, If we talk about all of the national faith institutions who are continuing, in spite of everything that's going on, to name climate change as a top priority, just quickly. I mean, we've got the Islamic Society of North America, the Episcopal Church, the Presbyterian Church USA, the American Baptist Churches USA, the Religious Action Center for Reform Judaism, the United Methodist Church, the AME Zion Church, the Christian Church Disciples of Christ, the United Church of Christ. I mean, I could keep going. And there are so many people or faith institutions really leading right now. And that wasn't the case 5 or 10 years ago. It just wasn't. But it is today. They're being visible, they're talking about it, they're providing opportunities for folks to get involved. There are lots of examples on the ground. In North Carolina, Jennifer, where you are, there's the Creation Care Alliance, which is a great example of a local group of an interfaith organization of folks who are trying to elevate climate solutions at the local level and also provide opportunities for things like, experiencing nature and education opportunities. I belong to an organization here in Fairfax County, Virginia, called the Faith Alliance for Climate Solutions that does a lot of similar things. They're organizing people of faith across faith traditions to show up virtually right now at city council meetings, at school board hearings, to talk about, can we get solar on schools? How do we talk about reducing waste in this county, and bringing our faith voices and faith values to that conversation really can make a big difference. And goodness, there are a lot of examples of reducing carbon emissions. I'm really excited that we just announced a partnership with an organization called Unity to offer access to financial capital and vetted contractors for congregations to pursue sustainable projects, especially right now, right? When congregations are struggling. We just know people aren't showing up. They're not necessarily tithing or giving as they had been. And so, now is a time where capital is needed. We're getting into the cold months, at least here in the not in the South necessarily, but, looking at boilers going bad and really needing to replace those. Can we do it in a way that's sustainable? And how do we get access to capital to do that? So lots of good things.
Yeah, and actually, there's an important Let's Talk Climate episode out on energy justice that we did with the American Public Health Association. So that's a good way to learn more about that issue. And I'll just everything you said, and in the health sector, we're really looking at that. You've talked about the compounding crises, and that's been really named as we're in the midst of a syndemic. So the ways that this layering of assaults that people are experiencing, and the environmental justice world has been working on cumulative impact legislation, trying to pass cumulative impact as a framework to set policy standards and regulations and enforcement, because of the way that low-income communities and communities of color have been facing multiple assaults, on their communities for decades, for centuries. And I think now, like, just for what Jennifer said, people are actually recognizing that the syndemic construct is it's a very real experience for very many people, and it gives me hope for the passage of cumulative impact framing on a state and federal level. And just a little hope from the health sector is it's October, which I keep having to remind myself because I'm having more and more difficulty keeping track of time. But it's October, which is Children's Health Month. And that's always a really exciting time for us. Here, we've made it a tradition to be really active on social media and amplify our partners like the Children's Environmental Health Network, Healthy Babies, Bright Futures, and the American Academy of Pediatrics, and all of the wonderful work they're doing on leadership, on climate action, with youth, with pediatricians, with folks who care about kids. And so please look out for, we're going to feature a blog series throughout the month on climate for health from members of the American Academy of Pediatrics who are getting active in this space. And even though I'm really active in this space, I read their blogs and it makes me so happy, and really gives me hope. And just to see the different kinds of activities they're engaging in. I just read one this morning, which is why I have the warm and fuzzies about it. Yeah. Oh, and thanks, Jess. I was going to say, I bet you'll see a chat in the chat box in order to subscribe to our blog series. So just check out and help us amplify that great work during Children's Health Month. It's a really important opportunity to highlight the great work that's being done. And I would just encourage folks to use significant dates like this, and we mentioned that earlier too, but as opportunities to organize. Next Thursday, October 8th, is Children's Environmental Health Day. And in addition to, Children's Environmental Health Network will be featuring a full day of programming. You can tune in and out as you're able, but it's a real opportunity to engage maybe your faith community, maybe your elected official, maybe your colleagues, in the health sector on this issue. So hope in the month of October.
Great.
Well, Rebecca, that's a great plug for the work that you've been doing on children's health. And Annie and I know as parents that like every month is Children's Health Month. You'll find out soon, Rebecca.
My daughter's home from daycare today. She's out with the puppy outside.
Well, young people, they're growing, they're developing, they're not fully developed. There's so many things they're encountering for the first time. Their little immune systems are trying to keep up. And so that's, it is one thing that really focuses us on those climate solutions when we see how much it impacts the young people. And they have been such amazing voices in the climate movement also, with Sunrise and Extinction Rebellion, and so many of our communities have leaders who are 16, 15 years old, which is terrific for them. And they speak again with that authentic voice, because they will inherit this earth. They will be alive in 2100 when we see the projections of things that could come to be if we don't take action. And so this has just been, I knew it was going to be a great conversation, and we could probably go on for about another hour, but we know that our listeners have other duties and responsibilities, and we just want to say thank you so much for listening. Many thanks to our behind the scenes folks at ecoAmerica, who do a great job of putting this webcast on every week. That's right. We love them. They've been filling the chat with lots of great resources. All of these chats are recorded. And you can go to our YouTube channel. Jess is putting up the address right now. You can watch the previous episodes. You can check out the conversation that I had recently with our partner in LA, Climate Resolve, who's doing great things about local urban heat and finding some great solutions there. We also have conversations coming up with Reverend Dr. Gerald Durley of Interfaith Power and Light, and with Dr. Aparna Bol, who is chair of the American Academy of Pediatrics Council on Environmental Health. So we're talking about, we end with the children, because the children are our future, and that makes us all smile. Every time we see Annie's baby, we smile. So be sure to engage with us using the hashtag Let's Talk Climate. Be sure to subscribe and follow us for the latest on thought leadership, resources, and episodes on climate action and advocacy. So from all of us at ecoAmerica and all of our sectors, thank you so much. Stay well, stay safe, and be sure to vote climate.